Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Opulence Abundance Talk Show. Okay, just give me one moment. Um, Yay, I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Happy Monday. Happy Pisces season. Happy longer days. We are heading towards spring. It's so exciting. I want to invite you all just to take, if you're able, I know some people might be in the car, some people might be, oh, I want to make sure you all can hear me. Let me know on Instagram if you can't hear me. But anyways, welcome, friends. I know people might be at work, might be on the car, but if you're able, just take a second to take 3 breaths. And in this time, if you aren't able, for whatever reason, to take breaths, just like take a pause, just like take a little internal pause while you're driving and just check in with yourself. All right, let's breathe. So today I actually grabbed one of my favorite books, M Archive by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. I love this book because I'm scared of the world ending. We are at a time of endings. Um, I really enjoy this book because it gives voice to what the end of the world might be like. And personally, I like having an image. It helps fill in the gaps of the unknown. Okay. So I'm going to read from this section called Archive of Ocean, parentheses, origin. This book is so, so good, y'all. If you haven't read it, I can't recommend it more. Okay. Ooh. The elements that are at the start of the chapter are hydrogen, sodium, oxygen, and chlorine. This is what it takes to cool the planet, hold the world together, protect the mysteries. Despite the surface violence and the pollution you try to bury in your heart, this is what it takes: the strength of no separation, the bravery of flow, the audacity of never saying, "This is me, this is not you, this is mine, this is not yours, this is now, this was not ever before." If you listen, each drop is saying always, always, which is homonym, which right now, listen to the ocean let go and become one. Let go and remain depth. Let go and just be everywhere. Salt particles aligned with the stars in the sky. Only water and love, only peace and breath. She is emptying her bladder for the gods, her heart for the here after here, her mind for the moving moment, her lungs for pushing through. She woke up on a planet with no land again, and all the leg strength that she had built, pushing her brain towards the sky, pushing the rock hard reality down. Standing up for this or that was now for floating. In this water without salt shores, so much for buoyancy. And even the salt within her pores pours out with effort of balance, diluted by the fact no land, just love, no anchor, just air, the weight of breath when within her, the heaviest heaven, her mind becoming clear, her heart becoming light. And the light within is not the sun, her body not an island, but enough. And that was how we got the ocean. She thought of all the things this world could have been and wasn't, and she wept and wept. All the animals and plants that never were, the people couldn't dream of being, the thoughts that would never ever occur to any of us, so uselessly busy proving our lives away, she could see all of it. She could feel all of it. Actually, she couldn't see anything because she just kept crying, a heavy, gasping cry. So her ragged lungs moved within the darkness. Crying laid out with no energy to get up or move an inch doesn't really look like the work of creation, but it is. It always was. Salt, her face, and all that never would be. She cried, and it became the ocean. And out of the ocean came life as we know it, life as we be it, the salt in our veins, the who we are, the who we are not. We have not yet seen the bottom of it, the depth of mourning that birthed us here. And it was, well, it was what it was. That was how the moon knew to pull the water, or how the water knew to let itself be pulled. In this vast collection of tears, there was more than jazz and tearing away. There was more than spit and amniotic memory. There was more than the liquid of it. There was also the heave, the sobbing momentum of it, that feeling that kept us contained and moving most of the time. Like if we started crying, we would never stop. Like if we opened up, we would drown. That was how the orbit made itself perpetual and the water continued to reach. Remember when we met underwater, weightless, flowering? Remember when we laced fingers or didn't based on tides or passing whales? Remember how our breathing turned into what would support us and everything else in the 1,000-mile radius of echo? And how our heartbeats were no different than this ocean pulled by moon? Remember? Remember that the whole planet was ocean, everywhere you've been. That desert valley was the bottom of the deep where something sentient used to swim, and every grain of sand and mineral and currently growing tree is breathing in the ghost of ocean, the infinite face of the deep. How do you think you know how to breathe and be pulled by the moon? And the ocean, she'll be back soon. The salt took everything out of her that the sun didn't want. And when she reached the shore, the sand cut her in a million places. Nothing about her was elastic or quenched or smooth. And technically, she was alive. While she waited for something else to happen, she considered that something was happening. Like maybe the sand cuts were turning into gills and the scales of her dried out skin were appropriate. She had a sense of herself one day soon, being able to breathe through her whole body, and then she passed out again. Wow, such a beautiful poem. I love this poem. I love meditating on salt, full of love today. But I think it's making me think about this weekend. I went to a Korean spa, as one does. And so, about 2 years ago, I went to a queer health fair, which was really exciting. And a nurse took my blood pressure and was like, "Oh, you have really high blood pressure." And that really stressed me out. And then last year, during my birthday, I went to a CVS Minute clinic to get like a last minute strep test and COVID test. It was a whole drama. And I met with that doctor at the CVS Minute clinic. He was a really good medical provider. And I told him about my anxieties around my blood pressure. And he really explained to me that like salt follows or water follows salt. And that the reason when we are at risk for high blood pressure that we have to cut down on sodium is because when we have more salt in our blood, it pulls water into our blood and it increases the pressure of the flow, which is why sweating more than exercise is really important for controlling blood pressure because it allows salt to leave our body and the water follows. Um, I also think about high blood pressure because, I'm on the borderline and then a lot of people are. And I had heard the science that like the higher your blood pressure, like if your blood pressure is over a certain number, it's like biologically impossible to listen. And it just made me wonder about what that meant for people with chronically high blood pressure. Um, yeah, this is also reminding me about like this one time my dad got cataract surgery, and immediately after having cataract surgery, he shared that, welcome, friend. My dad shared that after his cataract surgery, like I remember the moment he picked up a cup and he was just double taking all the time because his cataracts had caused him to not be able to see color. He was actually seeing the world in a yellow to brown scale. So colors like purple and white, and like a true red, they were just things that he had stopped seeing. And when he finally got his cataract fixed, he was able to experience that again. And it was extremely profound. I'm bringing this up because I definitely think of the way that our different abilities, our senses, aging, our body quality, all of these things can create a more narrow or expansive world for us. And I think in the case of my dad's cataracts, like he had those cataracts for so long. And I think colors slipped away in a way that he wasn't aware of or noticed. Um, but definitely watching him go through that, both the development of the cataracts and then having them removed. I watched both, like when he started saying things like, "Why do you leave the house? What is there to see?" And then after his cataracts, he was like, "Let's go look at colors. Like, let's go for drives." It was just such a change. So, thinking of all of those things. Anyways, thank you for listening to my random reflections, for reading some Alexis Pauline Gumbs with me. I think now it's a good time to jump into our topic of the day, which is, excuse me, somatic. Like, what is EMDR? So, this is an acronym a lot. It's a therapy that a lot of us have heard about. So, it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That's what EMDR stands for. So it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And in a nutshell, EMDR is a branch of somatic psychology, which we'll unpack later. But EMDR involves people sharing traumatic memories, and while sharing the memory, using eye movements to reprocess the memory and metabolize and like integrate the different emotions that might come up, if that makes sense. So when we're doing EMDR, we're revisiting a traumatic memory. They talk about having one foot in the present, one foot in the past. So before you even start the EMDR part, you'll likely work with a mental health professional to like establish some grounding skills, to do some exercises and notice how you feel. And then when you start bringing up traumatic memories, you'll practice staying present while remembering it. And then as you're remembering the memory, you will engage in some like different movements and eye movements that will allow your brain to process the information of the trauma and to truly process it and ideally integrate it into your body and then release. So I hope that makes sense. I wanted to share a little bit, just starting with this idea of like somatic psychology. And I just want to share about what somatic psychology is. And before we even go into there, I just want to name, like, when we think of psychology, very often psychology, we think of maybe Freud or different academic articles. Psychology, study of the psyche, prior to colonization and Western medicine. And a lot of people like Freud, Carl Jung, a lot of their ideas of psychology are actually rooted in religious texts. And so that's where we see an overlap between the psychological and the spiritual to understand that, in my opinion, from what I've studied, that often spiritual, how to talk about this, like thinking about who would have the resources to study things like these, if we think back to things like monasteries, or I guess they're called covenant. I'm forgetting like what the Christian word for it is, but ancient Christians, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, these were all kind of where this type of study and introspection and healing was living, and so psychology in the modern day pulls from that, but then it also separates it and it says, this is not spiritual, this is our psyche and our mind and bodies. They're all separate. We're all going to treat them differently. I do want to name that I think the way in which our modern world honors integration between the mind, body, spirit is like so toxic. I think that I see people using like a prosperity gospel where it's like, oh, if you're sick, and I believe that the mind, body, and spirit are connected, then you're sick because you have negative thoughts. I think that's a very toxic idea. I don't think that's a true idea. I think it's important to understand that back in the day, in these systems where the mind, body, soul are seen as connected, it's much more nuanced than that, right? So people are saying, oh, okay, you have a skin condition. So to relieve that skin condition, it's important for you to eat certain things and for us to look at your symptoms and determine what elements are in your constitution, and then maybe being prescribed exercises as well as herbs. So what I'm trying to say is, in this idea of mind, body, spirit integration, it was nuanced, it was detailed. We see a collapse of that detail in the modern world. Also, just naming that psychology has its roots in indigenous cultures, in culture and religion, in spirit. And when I think of EMDR, where some of the movements are to like turn your eyes all the way to one side, then to the other, for me, it brings up my memories of Indian dance, where a lot of dancers do those exaggerated eye movements. And so just to understand that, like, when we think about healing the body, healing the spirit, like, we might think of food. Food is healing, right? And when we look at different cultures, we can see how food and medicine are kind of one. And how that might be different from the conditions we're living in today, where there definitely is food as medicine. That's still a huge practice. But then there's also institutions that seek to feed us, and it's questionable if the food is even real food or if it's like styrofoam. And it's definitely not medicine, right? So just pulling out these differences. If you're on this live with me, thank you for hanging in here. If you're watching this in the future, thanks for watching. I hope that this can bring some clarity. So this term, somatic psychology, I think it's really interesting. It's basically this idea, it's a field of psychology that explores how developmental, social, and cultural events shape our identity and our body. So somatic psychology kind of brings the body into psychology, which in this modern Western world, that's a big deal. And this is all stuff I really want to credit Ariel Schwartz of the Embody Lab. I'm like literally reading off my notes from the Embody Lab, so I want to give credit where it's due. So when we think of embodiment from a scientific sense, we are thinking embodiment, that word, it means like the experience, the combined experience of sensations, movements, and emotion, and like movement impulses. We are thinking of our sensory feedback systems. So there's exteroception, what we perceive of the external world, interoception, what we perceive in our own bodies. So when we think about those two things, so like if we were to do a body scan and I was like, what do you feel? What do you notice pressure? Do you notice temperature? Do you feel the sensation of breath leaving your body? You might notice, oh, my hands feel cold. Oh, I can feel the floor on my feet and it's just thuddy. It's kind of dense, right? And then when we think of interoception, that's when I'm like, okay, take a breath. How do you feel? Or if someone's like, I'm breaking up with you, right? And then you're like, okay, how do I feel? And it's like, oh, my chest feels tight. My stomach feels clenched. Those are internal sensations. So that's interoception. And then we have proprioception, which is a really cool thing. I don't know if you've seen the studies, but there are like legit studies out there about how like dancing can reduce our chance of Alzheimer's by 70%, which is much more than other forms of movement. Definitely more than like doing a Sudoku a day. I think that like reduces chance of brain deterioration by maybe 20%. But dancing has really been shown to preserve the functions of our brain long term. It's highly recommended that we dance every day. That speaks to proprioception, which is when we dance, we engage proprioception. And proprioception is our brain understanding where in space we are. So, how our body is interacting with our environment, right? And that's super important. I guess just as an example, my body awareness means if I were to spread my hands out, I'm aware of this thing behind me. I'm aware of the objects around me. And if I'm not aware, I'll hit them and I might hurt myself. So these are integration of sense. These are sensory feedback systems. So also to proprioception, right? And working with exteroception, I can feel the back of my chair. And that's part of how I know I am in space. Embodiment and somatic psychology is also where this idea of mindful body awareness lives, which is also a cross modality term. So the ability to observe and be present with and sense and feel our moment and by moment experience through these sensory feedback perceptions through our body. So let me know if that's all making sense. I'm kind of going into the weeds. I wanted to give some time just to speak to these different systems through which we perceive the world. A key part of EMDR therapy before you get started in it is that if you have a good practitioner, that person is going to work with you to understand how do you perceive the world. And it was really powerful in this training. They were speaking to our different channels of feeling. So when we have a strong emotion, what is the comfortable channel for us to express that emotion? And I also love that they said that like language is always going to be the second language of the body, that our primary language is movement, sensing, feeling, expressing, dancing, singing, these very um, embodied ways of expression. So for some people, they feel emotion, and the right thing to do is to draw or paint. Some people look for songs, right? They're like looking up playlists, and that's how they're able to express and connect emotions. Some people can have an emotion and they can really sit there and be like, wow, I feel something spiraling in my chest and now it's turning left. Like some people have this incredible inner awareness. I love this concept that we all have our own channels of expression because it just really removes judgment, and it's more about understanding what is your channel of expression. What is the way that you are able to express yourself and to heal and to also make sense of the world and the sensations you experience. there is this idea of somatic intelligence. So as we build awareness over time, we can be more aware of our body, and we can actually like use our all these sensory feedback systems to help us understand how we feel, guide our decision making, communicate with others. And over time, awareness of our own body sensation increases our ability to empathize with others. And I also thought was so interesting is they were sharing how there were these studies that show like, and they were basically asserting that body awareness in combination with mental thought, it's that self-reflection on our like on our body feelings that creates consciousness. So if we're watching a show where someone does something and then we feel that clenching in our chest, that's our body saying like, oh, that is not an okay action to take. And it's our ability to connect. Oh, that person cheated on their partner. I feel anxious. That is not appropriate behavior. It's that connection between the mind and body, which is why when that connection is repressed or severed, there are more actions that might occur. Um, because that listening is offline, if it makes sense. You know, when I did a yoga teacher training, I learned all these like phrases that aren't helpful. And I feel like it's always a fight to find like the actual phrases. So thank you all for bearing with like these phrases like offline, embodied. I'm still finding the language that's right for it all. So when we think about EMDR and this process of metabolizing trauma in order to support moving forward, integrating it into our system, one of the first things that we're going to be asked to do is to build that body awareness, right? And because that body awareness is going to help us understand when we're in treatment, is treatment helpful? Are things going in a good direction? Or is this treatment going too far and causing issues? So again, a big part of why I've been doing these lives is just because I am in an EMDR training, and um I hope to be offering EMDR starting in mid-May, June. And I know people have expressed a lot of interest, so I wanted to create space for people to learn more about what exactly is EMDR and to also learn if it's right for them. If you have any questions, please let me know. When we think about EMDR, I know so many of us have trauma, and the idea that there are eye movements or things that could allow us to have freer lives, that could allow us to experience life as it is and not life through the lens of our unresolved trauma. It's very exciting. I say this as someone with a lot of trauma. So when I heard about EMDR, I was like, yeah, I need to get that. What I learned that I didn't know about EMDR is that EMDR is it's really meant for single incident trauma. It's not necessarily great for people maybe with complex PTSD. But if there are single incidents that still feel very emotionally charged, EMDR can be extremely helpful for that. So, an example of that is contrasting someone that maybe lived with an abusive relative over the course of years, contrasted to someone who maybe went through a car accident and have trouble driving because of that incident. So EMDR would be very helpful in processing the memories of that car crash and hopefully relieving some of the tension that accompanies it. Now, I do want to name like the reason our body holds on to trauma and we're impacted by trauma, it's a survival mechanism, right? Like we want to learn from the past. The past informs the future. So we don't want to diffuse everything. Like we want to feel that feeling of fear and concern that tells us to put on a seatbelt. But simultaneously, we don't want to be so controlled by the past that we're scared that it interrupts our daily functioning, essentially. Okay, so I just want to share. Actually, I think that is kind of the best place to go with EMDR. Um, So, just some few closing thoughts about EMDR. So, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. It's highly researched. It was actually created by this woman who was on a walk and thinking about a traumatic event. And because of the path that she was walking on, she started doing these diagonal eye movements, and she noticed it changed her experience and emotional experience of the event. And then she tested it out with friends, and then she ended up creating this field that has continued to be researched. There are phases in EMDR. There are very defined phases. So when you go through an EMDR process, um, your practitioner will guide you through each phase. So, starting by building body awareness, then resourcing, building resources and grounding. So we have the coping tools, and then going into the phases of processing trauma, and reprocessing. So it's metabolized into the body. From people I know who have done this type of therapy, they all say it is tough because you do have to relive trauma, and that can be really challenging. But there can be incredible healing through this process. So, a very key part of it is bilateral stimulation. And maybe that's actually a great way to end today, is I can share some of the movements that are used in EMDR. And these are movements that you can just try out and see how they make you feel. Just a note, always go slow, pause, see how you feel. Sometimes not for the movements I'm about to share, but some of these movements can cause nausea. So the first movement I just want to name, let's talk about with EMDR, is a little ear massage. So just taking a moment to rub our ears, the lobes, just going up and down the ear. Feels great. Okay. Okay, now that we've gotten our ear rub in, the next moment I want to share that is about bilateral stimulation. They're called arm sweeps, or my friend Kira wonderfully calls them lotioning. So you're just going to alternate hands and arms. So you'll do one side, then do the other, just sweeping down your arm. Just go slow, see how that feels. I just want to make a note that slowness is different for everyone. We all have our own speeds. In EMDR, they talk about how when you're trying to ground or just feel calm, you want to go slow. And when you're trying to reprocess a memory, that's when you want to go fast. So, not with these movements, but with eye movements. But right now, we're just grounding. So, we're going to go slow. So, you can sweep down your arm, or you can lotion down. So, you can squeeze down it. Just try that for a second. Okay. Um, that's one of my favorites. I can feel a yawn coming on, but it's like stuck for me. Okay, so the final movement I want to share with you all is the butterfly. And this is actually this practice. It is a part of EMDR, bilateral stimulation. I also tie it to the resilience toolkit taught by Income and Fado, an incredible leader. So you're just gonna cross over your hands and put them on your chest, and you'll just alternate tapping. See how that feels. These are all things that I learned through the resilience toolkit, but they are connected to some of the movements that I've learned by studying Qigong. And in Qigong, one of the big movements is to pound up and down on the heart and the chest. And they call this waking up the heart, like waking up the emperor. Another thing you can do through the Qigong lens that's really helpful is a purging exercise. So when you're releasing energy, slapping down the arm, slapping down the inside of the arm, give yourself a high five, then you slap up the arm. And then I usually like tapping this point between kind of where your arm shoulder meets your chest. That point, they call that the lung point. So that can be a great place to tap. I'm supposed to clear the lungs, and then I like to tap across to the other arm. You slap down the arm, give yourself a high five, slap up to the top, do it all again. Okay. I feel that we've gotten some blood moving. We're purging. I hope these movements are helpful for you all. I guess the final set of movements I would love to end on are these Qigong face massages that I have come to love. So you just rub your hands together. And the first one, you just put them over your eyes. Ugh, feels so good. Rub your hands together again. And you can place these hands over your ears. You can take your fingers and you make like a claw and you press down on the center of your forehead and you just pull apart and flick that energy off. And you can do that going all down your scalp. My apologies if you ruin your hair. Just pulling apart, flicking off the excess. Nice. Okay. The other thing you can do, I'll actually save that for another time. But thank you for joining me today. We'll just close out by generating heat once more. And you can just offer it wherever it needs to go. Sometimes when I cover my eyes, when I pull my hands back, I like to imagine that I'm like a newborn baby and I am seeing the world for the first time. Thank you so much, you all, for joining me today. Your time is so important. If you don't already, follow the link in my bio. You can subscribe to my newsletter, learn more about my work. And I hope to see you Friday, where we'll keep talking about what EMDR is. Okay, have a great week. Bye.